The howling wind rattled the broken wagon as Nora Kemp clutched her twin 6-month-old babies to her chest, desperately trying to shield them from the merciless December blizzard that had descended upon the Texas Panhandle without warning. It was 1887, and what had begun as a journey of hope had quickly deteriorated into a nightmare of ice and desperation. "Hush now, Matthew. Quiet, sweet Elizabeth," Nora whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air as she rocked the whimpering infants. The temperature had plummeted rapidly in the last hour, and the crude shelter provided by the overturned wagon was failing to keep out the biting cold. Snow had already begun to drift through the cracks, dusting the blankets she'd wrapped around her children with a fine layer of white. 3 days ago, Nora had left the small settlement of Trenton with what little she owned, determined to reach Amarillo, where her cousin had promised work and lodging. At 23, widowed less than a year after a mining accident had taken her husband, Nora had exhausted all options in the dying mining town. The journey should have taken just 2 days by wagon, but the axle had broken yesterday morning, and the driver, an elderly man she'd paid with her last dollars, had gone for help hours ago and never returned. Night was falling fast, and with it, Nora's hopes dimmed. The twins, usually so resilient, were growing quieter, their small faces pinched with cold despite being bundled against her. That frightened her more than their crying. "Please," she prayed, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Someone help us." Miles away, Yates Calloway pulled his hat lower against the stinging snow as he urged his horse forward through the gathering drifts. At 31, the rancher had spent enough winters in the Texas Panhandle to know better than to be caught out in a blizzard. But the stray cattle he'd been tracking had led him farther from his ranch than he'd intended. He'd given up on the steers hours ago, turning instead toward home, but the white-out conditions had disoriented even his experienced sense of direction. The bitter cold cut through his heavy sheepskin coat, and he knew if he didn't find shelter soon, he wouldn't survive the night. Through the curtain of snow, he spotted a dark shape on the horizon. Squinting against the whiteout, he made out what appeared to be an overturned wagon half buried in snowdrifts. "Come on, Samson," he urged his horse forward, hope flaring in his chest. Even a broken wagon might provide enough shelter to wait out the worst of the storm. As he drew closer, Yates heard something that made his blood run cold, the unmistakable wail of an infant, nearly lost in the howling wind. Dismounting quickly, he trudged through knee-deep snow to the partially collapsed wagon cover. "Hello," he called out, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Anyone there?" Inside the wagon's remains, Nora jolted at the sound of a human voice. For a moment, she thought she might be hallucinating. The cold could do that, she knew, but then she heard it again, closer this time. We're here," she cried out, her voice hoarse from the cold. The canvas flap lifted, and Nora blinked against the swirl of snow that entered with the broad-shouldered figure. She clutched her babies tighter, both fear and desperate hope coursing through her. The man's face was mostly hidden by a snow-crusted scarf, but his eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of her and the twins. "Good Lord, madam," he said, immediately crouching down beside her. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here with little ones?" "Wagon broke," Nora explained through chattering teeth. "Driver went for help yesterday, never came back." Yates surveyed the situation quickly. The woman was pale, her lips taking on a bluish tinge that alarmed him, and the babies, though bundled against her, were far too quiet for his comfort. "I'm Yates Calloway," he said, already unwrapping his scarf to place around her neck. "My ranch is about 5 miles from here, I reckon. We need to get you all there now, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Nora Kemp," she whispered. "These are Matthew and Elizabeth, please. Help them first." "I'm getting all 3 of you out of here," Yates said firmly, his decision made. "Can you stand?" Nora tried, but her legs had long since gone numb. Yates didn't waste another moment. He quickly unbuttoned his heavy coat. "I'll carry you all. It's the only way. The babies go inside my coat against me, and you'll ride in front of me on the saddle." Nora wanted to protest. It seemed impossible that one man could transport all three of them through this storm, but she had no alternative to offer. With trembling hands, she passed her precious bundles to the stranger. Yates tucked the infants securely inside his coat, making sure their faces could still breathe but were protected from the elements. Then, with a strength born of necessity, he lifted Nora as well, carrying her through the deep snow to where his horse waited. It took all his skill to mount while holding both Nora and the twins, but somehow he managed, settling her sideways across the saddle in front of him, her body leaning against his chest next to where the babies were sheltered. "Hold on to me," he instructed, wrapping one arm around her waist while the other held the reins. "Don't you dare fall asleep, you hear me? Talk to me about those babies. Tell me their names again." As Yates guided his horse through the blinding storm, Nora fought to stay conscious, focusing on the solid warmth of the man behind her and the knowledge that her children were still alive, sheltered against his chest. "Matthew, after my father," she murmured. "Elizabeth, my mother's name." "Good strong names," Yates replied, his deep voice rumbling against her back. "How old are they?" "6 months, born last June." "Twins run in your family, my husband's," Nora answered, the word husband catching in her throat. "He never got to see them." Yates tightened his hold on her as she swayed slightly. "Stay with me, Mrs. Kemp. We've got a ways to go yet." The journey was torturous. The wind shrieked around them, and several times Samson nearly lost his footing in the deepening snow. Yates relied on instinct more than visibility, trusting his horse and his knowledge of the land to guide them home. One of the babies Yates couldn't tell which began to cry weakly, the sound muffled against his chest but audible enough to spur him on. "That's it, little one," he encouraged. "You keep on fighting." Nora's head lolled against his shoulder and he jostled her gently. "Mrs. Kemp, Nora, I need you to stay awake." "Trying," she whispered. "Tell me where you were headed," he urged, desperate to keep her talking. "Amarillo," she said. "My cousin." She said there's work there. "That's where we are, just outside Amarillo," Yates told her. "My ranch is north of town. We're almost there, I promise." It felt like an eternity, but finally, the dim outline of a 2-story house appeared through the curtain of snow. Nearby stood a large barn and several outbuildings, the Calloway ranch. "Rosa," Yates bellowed as they approached. "Rosa," the front door of the house flew open, and a stout Mexican woman of about 50 appeared, holding a lantern high. "Dios mío," she exclaimed, rushing forward as Yates carefully dismounted, somehow managing to keep hold of his precious cargo. "Get the doctor," he ordered, carrying Nora toward the house while the twins remained tucked inside his coat. "And stoke the fire in the main bedroom." "The doctor can't come in this, Senor Yates," Rosa replied, hurrying alongside him. "The pass will be blocked." Yates cursed under his breath. "Then prepare hot water bottles, blankets, everything we've got. These babies are half frozen." Inside the warmth of the ranch house, Yates carried Nora directly upstairs to the main bedroom, where a fire already burned in the hearth. Rosa hurried ahead, pulling back the thick quilts on the large bed. "Lay her here," she instructed. "I will warm bricks for the bed." Gently, Yates placed Nora on the bed, then carefully extracted the twins from inside his coat. To his immense relief, both were still breathing, though their small faces were pale. "Rosa, take them," he said, passing the infants to his housekeeper. "They need warming gradually." "Not too much heat at once," Rosa nodded, cradling the babies expertly. "I raised 5 children, senor. These little ones will be fine with Rosa." She peered at Nora with concern. "The mother is very cold." "I'll see to her," Yates said. "Just get those babies warm and find some milk if you can." As Rosa left with the twins, Yates turned his attention to Nora. Her clothes were damp from the snow, her skin icy to the touch. He knew what needed to be done, though propriety made him hesitate. "Mrs. Kemp, Nora," he called, patting her cheek gently. Her eyes fluttered open briefly. "Your clothes are wet. They need to come off so you can warm up. Do you understand?" Nora managed a weak nod, her eyes closing again. Working as efficiently and modestly as possible, Yates removed her sodden outer garments, quickly wrapping her in warm blankets. He placed heated bricks wrapped in flannel at her feet and along her sides, careful not to place them directly against her cold skin. "The babies," she whispered when he'd finished. "Rosa has them. They're being warmed and cared for," he assured her, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Rest now." "You're safe." Downstairs, Rosa had unwrapped the twins from their damp blankets and swaddled them in warm, dry ones. She had placed them in a basket near the kitchen hearth, the warmest spot in the house, and was preparing warm goat's milk diluted with sugar water, the best substitute she could manage for mother's milk. "Pobrecitos," she murmured, gently stroking their cheeks to encourage them to suckle from the bottle she'd fashioned. Such little angels. Through the night, Yates and Rosa worked tirelessly. Yates checked on Nora frequently, adding wood to the fire and replacing the cooling bricks with heated ones. Rosa tended to the twins, who gradually regained their color and began to cry with more vigor, a sound that Yates found surprisingly welcome, as it signaled their improving condition. Near dawn, Nora woke more fully, panic immediately seizing her as she realized she was in an unfamiliar room without her children. "Matthew, Elizabeth," she cried, attempting to rise. "They're safe," Yates said quickly, entering the room with a steaming mug of broth. "Rosa's looking after them downstairs. They're warm and fed and doing much better." Nora sank back against the pillows, relief washing over her face. "Truly, truly," he confirmed, helping her sit up and offering the broth. "The boy has quite a set of lungs on him." The girl's quieter, but Rosa says she's got a strong grip. Tears filled Nora's eyes as she accepted the mug with trembling hands. "I thought we were going to die out there." "But you didn't," Yates said simply. "You kept those babies alive until help came. That's something to be proud of." Nora sipped the broth gratefully, feeling warmth spread through her body. For the first time, she truly looked at her rescuer. Yates Calloway was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a strong jaw covered in stubble. His eyes, a striking blue, conveyed both authority and kindness. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Calloway," she said. "Yates," he corrected. "And no thanks needed. Couldn't very well leave a woman and 2 babies to freeze, could I? Some might have," she replied softly. "The driver did." Yates frowned. "What happened exactly?" As Nora explained about the broken wagon and the driver who had abandoned them, Yates's expression darkened. "Leaving you there was as good as murder," he said grimly. "If I find out who, it doesn't matter now," Nora interrupted. "We're alive because of you." Before Yates could respond, Rosa appeared in the doorway, a baby in each arm. "These little ones want their mama," she announced with a smile. Nora's face lit up at the sight of her children, and Yates felt something stir inside him, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the fire blazing in the hearth. Rosa placed the twins carefully on the bed beside Nora, who immediately gathered them close, examining every inch of their faces. "They're perfect," she whispered. "Thank God. They are strong like their mother," Rosa said approvingly. "I have prepared a room next door for them with a cradle big enough for both." "Thank you," Nora said sincerely. "But I don't want to impose. You're not going anywhere in this weather," Yates interrupted firmly. "The storm's still raging and you all need time to recover." As if to emphasize his point, a gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a spray of snow against the glass. "But your cousin in Amarillo," Rosa began. "I don't actually have a cousin," Nora admitted, her cheeks coloring slightly. I had nowhere else to go after my husband died. Someone in Trenton mentioned work in Amarillo, so I was headed there to look." Yates and Rosa exchanged glances. "Well, you'll stay here until spring thaw at least," Yates declared. "We're isolated when the snow's deep, and I won't risk taking you and the little ones back out in this." "I can't accept such charity," Nora protested weakly, though relief was evident in her voice. "It's not charity," Yates replied. "Rosa could use help with the house, and I've got men coming back for the spring roundup who'll need feeding. You can earn your keep if that makes you feel better." Nora nodded gratefully. "It does. Thank you. That evening, after Nora had nursed the twins and settled them in the cradle Rosa had prepared, she stood by the window watching the ongoing blizzard. The wind had sculpted massive drifts against the barn and fences, transforming the landscape into something alien and beautiful. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Yates entered, carrying a tray with a bowl of stew and fresh bread. Rosa insisted you need more food, he explained, setting the tray on a small table. She says you're too thin for nursing two babies. Nora smiled. She's probably right, I haven't had much appetite since. She trailed off, the memories of her husband's death still raw. Since your husband passed, Yates finished gently. I understand, I lost my wife 5 years ago, fever took her. Nora looked at him with newfound understanding. I'm sorry, did you have children? Pain flickered across his face. No, we tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with shared grief and unspoken understanding. The twins are beautiful children, Yates finally said. You must be very proud. They're all I have left of Thomas, Nora replied, her voice catching. He died in a mine collapse just after I discovered I was expecting. He never even knew it would be twins. Yates moved to stand beside her at the window, both of them gazing out at the swirling snow. Life has a way of taking with one hand and giving with the other, he said quietly. I lost Emily, but I built this ranch into something that would have made her proud. You lost your husband, but you have those two little miracles to carry his memory forward. Nora looked up at him, struck by the simple wisdom of his words. Yes, she agreed. I suppose we all find a way to keep going, don't we? We do, Yates confirmed. Now eat that stew before Rosa comes looking for the bowl. She's small, but she's mighty fearsome when crossed. That made Nora laugh, the first genuine laugh she'd experienced in many months, and the sound of it caused an unexpected tightening in Yates's chest. As the blizzard continued to rage outside, an unexpected peace settled over the occupants of the Calloway ranch house. None of them could have predicted the turns their lives would take in the coming months, or how 3 strangers carried through a snowstorm by one determined man would gradually become something like a family. The storm lasted 3 more days, dropping nearly 4 feet of snow across the Texas panhandle. Drifts piled against the ranch house, and Yates spent hours each day clearing paths to the barn and outbuildings to tend to the livestock. Inside, Nora gradually regained her strength. By the 4th day of her stay, she insisted on helping Rosa with household tasks while keeping the twins nearby in a basket or wrapped against her chest in a shawl. You have a good touch with bread, Rosa commented one morning as she watched Nora knead dough with practiced hands. Most young women these days buy from bakeries when they can. We couldn't afford store bread, Nora explained, working the dough with steady movements. And before I married, I helped my mother run a boarding house. We baked daily for 12 men. Rosa nodded approvingly. Senor Yates, he will appreciate good bread. That man works hard but pays little attention to feeding himself properly since his wife died. Nora glanced toward the window where she could see Yates in the distance, chopping wood despite the bitter cold. He's been very kind to us. He has a good heart, Rosa said simply. Too long alone, I think. Before Nora could respond, Elizabeth began fussing in her basket. She wiped her hands on her apron and lifted the baby, noting that Matthew would likely wake hungry soon as well. Go, feed the bebés, Rosa urged. I will finish the bread. Nora took the twins to the sitting room where a fire burned steadily in the hearth. As she settled into a rocking chair to nurse Elizabeth, the front door opened and Yates entered, bringing a blast of cold air with him. Sorry, he said, quickly closing the door behind him. He stamped snow from his boots and hung his coat on a peg, then turned to find Nora nursing. Oh, I didn't mean to intrude, it's all right, she assured him, adjusting her shawl for modesty. This is your home, after all. Yates nodded awkwardly, then moved to warm his hands by the fire. Storms finally breaking, skies clearing to the west. Does that mean the roads will be passable soon? Nora asked, uncertain whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Not for weeks yet, he replied. Snow this deep takes time to melt, especially in the shadows. The pass to Amarillo will be blocked until at least February, I reckon. Nora nodded, secretly glad for the extended reprieve. The thought of taking her babies into Amarillo with no guaranteed work or lodging had been terrifying before. Now, after experiencing the comfort and safety of the ranch, it seemed even more daunting. I meant what I said about you staying through winter, Yates continued, as if reading her thoughts. In fact, I've been thinking about a more permanent arrangement. Nora looked up sharply, her heart suddenly racing. What sort of arrangement? Yates ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Well, as you've probably noticed, this place could use a woman's touch. Rosa does her best, but she's getting on in years. Come spring, I'll have 6 cowhands living in the bunkhouse, all needing meals and laundry. You're offering me a position, Nora clarified, both relieved and oddly disappointed. As housekeeper, yes, he confirmed. With quarters for you and the twins, of course, better than heading to Amarillo with no prospects. That's very generous, Nora said carefully. But I wouldn't want to displace Rosa. You wouldn't be, he assured her quickly. Rosa's family, not staff. She came with Emily when we married and stayed on after I lost her. She'd welcome the help, especially with the cooking. Her joints pain her in damp weather. As if summoned by mention of her name, Rosa appeared in the doorway. The bread is rising, she announced. Now I go check the stew. She looked between them with knowing eyes before disappearing back into the kitchen. Think on it, Yates said. No need to decide now. Elizabeth had finished nursing and Nora shifted her to her shoulder, patting her back gently. I don't need to think on it, she replied. I'd be grateful for the position and I promise to earn my keep. Relief crossed Yates's face. Good, that's good. Matthew began to cry from his basket and Yates hesitated, then moved toward the baby. May I? He asked, gesturing toward Matthew. Surprised, Nora nodded. Of course. With unexpected gentleness, Yates lifted the fussing infant, cradling him carefully in his large hands. Hello there, young man, he said softly. Hungry, are you? The baby's cries subsided slightly as he stared up at the unfamiliar face above him. He likes you, Nora observed, watching as her son reached up to grasp Yates's finger. Got a strong grip, Yates commented, a smile softening his normally serious features. He'll make a fine cowhand someday. Something about the way he looked at her son with such natural affection made Nora's heart turn over in her chest. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where her children had a father figure to guide them. She quickly pushed the thought away. Yates Calloway was her employer now, nothing more. The fact that he was kind to her children was a blessing, but she couldn't allow herself to read anything more into it. As January gave way to February, life at the Calloway Ranch fell into a comfortable routine. The snow began to melt during the day, though nights remained bitterly cold. Yates worked from dawn till dusk, repairing fences and outbuildings damaged by the storm, while Nora transformed the ranch house with her presence. The twins thrived in the stable environment. At 7 months, they were becoming more active, attempting to crawl and babbling constantly. Matthew, the more adventurous of the two, had developed a habit of trying to escape his basket whenever Nora's back was turned. That boy is going to be trouble, Rosa predicted affectionately one evening as she helped Nora bathe the twins in a tin tub by the kitchen fire. Just like my Emilio was at that age. He's certainly determined, Nora agreed, laughing as Matthew splashed water everywhere. Elizabeth is the patient one. She watches and waits. She is studying the world, Rosa observed. Smart girl. After the babies were bathed and dressed in clean nightgowns, Nora carried them upstairs to the nursery that had once been a storage room. Yates had surprised her by clearing it out and setting up not only the cradle, but also a small rocking chair and a chest for the twins' few belongings. As she settled the babies for the night, singing softly, she didn't notice Yates standing in the doorway, watching with an expression of mingled longing and contentment. It wasn't until she turned to leave that she saw him. "Oh, I didn't realize you were there." "Didn't want to interrupt," he said, his voice low. "What was that song? It's pretty." "Just an old lullaby my mother sang to me," Nora replied, pulling the door partly closed behind her. The twins seemed to like it. They stood awkwardly in the hallway for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither was prepared to name. "I wanted to let you know," Yates finally said. "I'll be riding into town tomorrow if the weather holds. The pass should be clear enough now. Is there anything you need?" "Some fabric if it's not too much trouble," Nora requested. "The twins are growing so fast and I'd like to make them some new clothes." "Consider it done," Yates promised. "And perhaps some ribbon for yourself. Rosa mentioned tomorrow is your birthday." Nora blushed. She shouldn't have said anything. It's not important. 24 is an important year, Yates insisted, and you deserve something nice. Before she could protest further, he continued, "I've invited Pastor Wilson and his wife for dinner tomorrow. They've been asking after you and the twins since I mentioned you at church last Sunday." "You told people about us?" Nora asked, suddenly concerned. "Just that I've hired a housekeeper with 2 young ones," Yates assured her. "Nothing improper. The Wilsons are good people. I thought you might enjoy some company besides Rosa and me." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Nora deeply. Since Thomas's death, few people had shown concern for her happiness. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That would be lovely." Yates nodded, looking pleased. "Well then, good night, Mrs. Kemp." "Nora," she corrected gently. "If I'm to call you Yates, then you should call me Nora." A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Yates." The next day dawned clear and mild, the first truly spring-like day of the year. Yates departed for Amarillo shortly after breakfast, promising to return by mid-afternoon. Nora spent the morning cleaning the house thoroughly in preparation for dinner guests, while Rosa prepared her special chili con carne and cornbread. The twins napped peacefully, exhausted from their morning play session with Rosa's colorful wooden blocks. "You look happy today," Rosa observed as they worked side by side, Nora rolling out pie crust while Rosa chopped apples. "Do I?" Nora asked, surprised. "I suppose I am. It's been a long time since I celebrated my birthday." "It is good to celebrate life," Rosa said wisely. "Especially after sorrow," Nora nodded, her hands working the dough mechanically as her mind drifted. "Sometimes I feel guilty for being happy when Thomas is gone." "Ah," Rosa sighed, putting down her knife and turning to face Nora fully. "This is natural but not right. Your husband, would he want you sad forever?" "No," Nora admitted. "He was always full of joy himself." "Then honor his memory by finding joy again," Rosa urged, "not by staying in sorrow." Before Nora could respond, the sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention. Rosa moved to the window. "Senor Yates returns," she announced, "and he brings many packages." Curious, Nora wiped her hands and joined Rosa at the window. Sure enough, Yates was driving the wagon up to the house, the back loaded with supplies. "He has been busy in town," Rosa commented with a knowing smile. Nora hurried outside to help unload, despite Yates's protests that he could manage. "Nonsense," she said firmly. 4 hands work faster than 2. Together they carried the supplies inside sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, canned goods, and several packages wrapped in brown paper that Yates set aside with unusual care. "These are for later," he said mysteriously when Nora inquired about them. By the time Pastor Wilson and his wife arrived for dinner, the house smelled deliciously of apple pie and Rosa's spicy stew. The twins were awake and dressed in their best clothes, cooing happily from their basket in the sitting room. Rebecca Wilson, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, immediately gravitated to the babies. "Oh my, aren't they precious?" she exclaimed, bending to examine them closely. "Such beautiful children, may I hold one?" "Of course," Nora replied, lifting Elizabeth and placing her in Mrs. Wilson's eager arms. Pastor Wilson, a tall, dignified man with silver hair, smiled at the scene. "Becky loves babies," he explained to Nora. We were blessed with 4 of our own, but they are all grown now with families of their own back east. Do you miss them terribly?" Nora asked, thinking of her own parents, both long dead. "Every day," Mrs. Wilson admitted, "but serving this community fulfills us. And now that Yates has finally found someone to help manage this big old house, perhaps he'll join church activities more often." Nora caught Yates's eye across the room, noting his slight embarrassment at Mrs. Wilson's comment. "Becky," Pastor Wilson admonished gently, "don't make assumptions." "It's quite all right," Nora assured them. "I'm grateful for the position. Mr. Calloway saved my children's lives." Over dinner, conversation flowed easily. Pastor Wilson shared news from town, including plans for a spring social in April. "You must all come," Mrs. Wilson insisted. "The whole community would love to meet you and these beautiful babies, Mrs. Kemp. Please call me Nora," she replied. "And I'd like that very much." After the meal, as Rosa served coffee and apple pie, Yates disappeared briefly, returning with the mysterious packages from town. "Since we're celebrating Nora's birthday," he announced, "I took the liberty of bringing a few gifts." Nora's cheeks flushed with pleasure and embarrassment as he placed the packages before her. "You really shouldn't have," she protested weakly. "Open them," Mrs. Wilson encouraged, clearly delighted by the surprise. The first package contained several yards of soft blue cotton and white muslin, perfect for making baby clothes. The second held ribbon in various colors, as promised, along with buttons and lace trim. The third package, smaller than the others, contained a leather-bound journal and a silver pen. "For your thoughts," Yates explained when she looked up questioningly. "You mentioned once that you used to enjoy writing." The fact that he had remembered such a casual comment made weeks ago during an evening conversation by the fire touched Nora deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "All of it is wonderful." "There's one more," Yates said, producing a final package from behind his back. "This one's for the twins, really." Intrigued, Nora unwrapped it to find a handcrafted wooden rocking horse, small enough for the babies to sit on when they were a bit older, with real horsehair for the mane and tail. "Oh, Yates," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful." "Hank Miller's boy makes them," Yates explained, looking pleased by her reaction. "I thought Matthew especially might enjoy it once he's steady sitting up." "It's perfect," Nora assured him. "They'll love it." Pastor Wilson cleared his throat, exchanging a meaningful glance with his wife. "Well, this has been a lovely evening, but we should be getting back before dark." After the Wilsons departed with promises to see them at church on Sunday, Nora helped Rosa clear away the dishes while Yates carried the sleeping twins upstairs to their cradle. When Nora went up to check on them a few minutes later, she found Yates still there, watching the babies sleep with an expression of such tenderness that her heart constricted painfully in her chest. "They're remarkable," he said quietly as she joined him beside the cradle. "So tiny, yet so complete." "Yes," Nora agreed. "I still marvel at them every day." Yates turned to her, his expression serious. "Nora, I hope I didn't overstep with the gifts. I just wanted your birthday to be special." "It was the most wonderful birthday I've had in years," she assured him. "Thank you for everything, especially for inviting the Wilsons. It was nice to meet people from town." Relief washed over his features. "Good, that's good." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. Finally, Yates stepped back. "Well, I should let you get some rest," he said. "Happy birthday, Nora." "Thank you, Yates, for everything." After he left, Nora remained by the cradle, her mind and heart in turmoil. She was developing feelings for Yates Calloway, feelings that went far beyond gratitude for his kindness. But was it too soon after Thomas? And would Yates, still mourning his wife after 5 years, ever be able to open his heart to her and her children? As February melted into March, the Texas landscape began to awaken from its winter slumber. Green shoots pushed through the soil, and the air grew milder with each passing day. Yates spent long hours in the fields, preparing for spring planting and the return of his ranch hands. Nora settled fully into her role as housekeeper. keeping the large house immaculate while caring for her increasingly mobile twins. Matthew had mastered crawling and was attempting to pull himself up on furniture, while Elizabeth, though less physically adventurous, babbled constantly in what seemed like full conversations with herself. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Wilson approached Nora with an invitation. "The Ladies' Aid Society meets Tuesday afternoons," she explained. "We sew for the needy and share news. I think you'd enjoy it, dear, and it would give you a chance to meet more women from town." Nora hesitated. "The twins, bring them along," Mrs. Wilson encouraged. "The ladies would love to fuss over them. Several have grandchildren about their age." Before Nora could respond, Yates joined them, his Sunday suit making him look even more handsome than usual. "You should go, Nora," he said, having overheard the conversation. "Rosa can manage without you for an afternoon." "Are you sure?" Nora asked, torn between the desire for female companionship and her sense of duty. "Absolutely," Yates confirmed. "I'll even drive you into town myself." And so, on Tuesday, Nora found herself in the church meeting hall, surrounded by a dozen women of various ages, all cooing over the twins while they worked on quilts destined for new mothers in need. "Your babies are thriving," observed Clara Jenkins, the doctor's wife. "Hard to believe they nearly froze to death just a few months ago." "We were fortunate Mr. Calloway found us when he did," Nora replied, carefully stitching a quilt square. "Indeed," agreed elderly Mrs. Thornton, her arthritic hands still nimble with a needle. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." Why, if Yates hadn't been out looking for those stray cattle that very day? "It's quite the romantic tale," added Sarah Miller, a pretty young woman about Nora's age. "Like something from a novel." Nora blushed. "There's nothing romantic about nearly freezing to death, I assure you." "Perhaps not," Mrs. Wilson interjected with a knowing smile. "But there might be something romantic about what's happened since." The other women exchanged meaningful glances, making Nora increasingly uncomfortable. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "Mr. Calloway is my employer." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Thornton patted her hand. "And a fine Christian gentleman he is too. Emily's passing hit him hard, but 5 years is long enough to mourn. The good book itself says it's not good for man to be alone. Especially a man with such a fine ranch," added practical Mrs. Jenkins. "And those twins need a father." "Ladies," Mrs. Wilson interrupted, noting Nora's discomfort. "We're embarrassing poor Nora. Let's change the subject, shall we?" Grateful for the intervention, Nora focused on her stitching, but her mind whirled with the women's implications. Did the whole town assume there was something between her and Yates? And more troublingly, was her own growing affection for him that transparent? Later that afternoon, as Yates drove them back to the ranch in his wagon, the twins sleeping peacefully in a basket at Nora's feet, she remained unusually quiet. "Didn't you enjoy the meeting?" Yates asked, concerned by her silence. "The women were very kind," Nora replied carefully. Yates glanced at her, reading her expression. "But," Nora sighed, "they seem to have certain ideas about our arrangement." "Ah," Yates said, understanding immediately, "small-town gossip." "Yes," Nora confirmed, relieved he understood. "I wouldn't want anything to damage your reputation, my reputation," Yates interrupted with a short laugh. "Nora, I'm more concerned about yours. A young widow living in a bachelor's home, even with Rosa as chaperone, it's bound to raise eyebrows." "I hadn't thought of it that way," Nora admitted. "Perhaps I should look for lodgings in town once the weather warms completely." Yates pulled the wagon to an abrupt halt, turning to face her fully. "Is that what you want?" The intensity of his gaze made Nora's heart race. I don't know. The twins are happy at the ranch." "And you've been so kind, this isn't about kindness," Yates said, his voice low and urgent. "Nora, surely you must know that a sharp cry from Elizabeth, suddenly awakened, interrupted whatever he had been about to say." Nora quickly lifted the baby, murmuring soothing words. The moment broken, Yates flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion again. They completed the journey in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Nora sat in the kitchen with Rosa, helping to shell peas for the next day's dinner. "Rosa," she began hesitantly, "do you think it's improper for me to be living here?" The older woman looked up sharply. "Who has been talking to you? Those church women?" Nora nodded, embarrassed. "Bah," Rosa dismissed with a wave of her hand. "They have nothing better to do than gossip. You are employed here honestly. The babies need a safe home. Where is the impropriety? It's just, Yates is an unmarried man and I'm a young widow," Nora explained. "People might think, let them think," Rosa interrupted firmly. "You and Senor Yates know the truth." Nora hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Rosa, does Yates, has he ever mentioned feelings for me?" Rosa put down her paring knife, regarding Nora with wise, gentle eyes. "He does not need to mention them to me. I have eyes. I see how he watches you with the babies, how he smiles more since you came. But Senor Yates, he is cautious. He loved his Emily very much." "As I loved Thomas," Nora said softly. But love is not a cup with only enough for one person in a lifetime," Rosa said. "It is a well that refills." Before Nora could respond, the back door opened and Yates entered, bringing the scent of night air with him. "Evening, ladies," he greeted, hanging his hat on a peg. "Something smells good." "Just coffee," Rosa replied, rising. "I will pour you a cup." As Rosa busied herself at the stove, Yates took the seat across from Nora, automatically reaching for a handful of peas to shell. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "The ranch hands arrive next week," he finally said. "5 of them plus the cook for the bunkhouse." "I'll make sure the bunkhouse is ready," Nora promised, "and stock it with supplies." Yates nodded. "I appreciate that. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you." Nora looked up, her hands stilling. "Yes." "I've been thinking about what you said earlier about moving to town," he began carefully. "If that's truly what you want, I won't stand in your way, but before you decide, I'd like you to consider another option." Nora's heart began to race. "What option?" Yates took a deep breath. "Marriage." "To me?" The pea pod Nora had been holding split open, scattering peas across the table. Rosa, standing by the stove, made a small sound of surprise but remained silent. "Yates," Nora breathed, hardly believing what she'd heard. Are you proposing?" "Not very well, apparently," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "I'd planned to do this properly after church on Sunday with flowers and such." "But why?" Nora asked, still stunned. "Why would you want to marry me?" Yates reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. "Because in these past months, you and those babies have brought life back to this house and to me. I thought after Emily died that I'd never want another wife. But watching you with Matthew and Elizabeth, seeing your strength and kindness, I've fallen in love with all 3 of you." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. "But what about Thomas? It's been barely a year since. I'm not asking you to forget him," Yates assured her earnestly. "He'll always be the twins' father. But they need someone to help raise them, to teach Matthew to ride and fish, to walk Elizabeth down the aisle someday. And you, Nora, you deserve someone who will cherish you, not just employ you." Rosa quietly slipped from the room, giving them privacy. "I don't know what to say," Nora whispered, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. "You don't have to answer now," Yates told her, squeezing her hand gently. "Take time to think, pray about it, but know that my feelings won't change." Nora nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Thank you for understanding." That night, sleep eluded Nora completely. She lay awake, listening to the twins' soft breathing from their cradle, her mind replaying Yates's proposal again and again. Did she love him? The answer came quickly and without doubt, yes. Somewhere between that desperate rescue in the snowstorm and tonight, she had fallen deeply in love with Yates Calloway. She loved his gentleness with her children, his quiet strength, the way his rare smile transformed his serious face. But was it right to marry again so soon after Thomas? Would it dishonor his memory? As dawn broke, Nora rose quietly and moved to the window, watching as the first pink light of morning touched the distant hills. She thought of Thomas, his laugh, his dreams for their future, the joy in his eyes when she'd told him she was expecting. "What would you want for us, Thomas?" she whispered to the sunrise. The answer seemed to come from within her own heart: happiness, safety, love. Yates could provide all three, not just for her, but for Matthew and Elizabeth too. Thomas would have approved of that, she was certain. Her decision made, Nora dressed quickly and went downstairs. To her surprise, she found Yates already in the kitchen, drinking coffee alone. "You're up early," he commented, rising as she entered. "I needed to talk to you," Nora replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "About your proposal." Yates's expression grew guarded. "You've decided?" Nora nodded, moving closer to him. "Yes, my answer is yes, Yates, I will marry you." For a moment he stood perfectly still, as if afraid he'd misheard. Then his face broke into a smile of such radiant joy that Nora's breath caught. In 2 strides he crossed to her, gathering her into his arms. "You're certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm certain," she confirmed, looking up into his face. "The twins and I belong here with you." Yates lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he kissed her tenderly at first, then with growing passion as she responded, her arms twining around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Yates pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise to be a good husband to you and a good father to your children," he vowed. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I know you will," Nora replied softly, "and I promise to make this house a true home for all of us." From the doorway came a small sniffle. They turned to find Rosa watching them, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Gracias a Dios," she said, crossing herself. "At last, this house will be as it should be, filled with love and children's laughter." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community of Amarillo. The Wilsons were particularly delighted, Pastor Wilson offering to perform the ceremony at the church whenever they wished. "Spring would be lovely," Mrs. Wilson suggested. "Everything will be in bloom." "Actually," Yates said, glancing at Nora for confirmation, "we were thinking of next Sunday after services." Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "So soon?" "There's no reason to wait," Nora explained gently. "And with the ranch hands arriving, it would be easier if our situation was formalized." Understanding dawned on Mrs. Wilson's face. "Of course, dear, we'll make it beautiful, even on short notice." The week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The ranch hands arrived as scheduled weathered men who treated Yates with respect and regarded Nora with shy courtesy. They seemed especially taken with the twins, who were now nearly 8 months old and full of personality. "They're going to have those cowboys wrapped around their little fingers," Yates observed one evening as he watched Bull Anderson, the oldest and toughest of the hands, making faces at Elizabeth to hear her giggle. "They already do," Nora replied with a smile. "Just like they have their future father." Yates's expression grew serious. "Nora, I've been thinking, after we're married, I'd like to adopt the twins legally, make them Calloways in name as well as in my heart." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes at his words. "You do that?" "If you approve," he said. "I want them to know they're as much mine as if they'd been born to me." "Thomas would be grateful knowing they have such a good man to call father," Nora told him, her voice thick with emotion. "And so am I." On their wedding day, the small church overflowed with well-wishers. Nora wore a simple cream-colored dress that she'd sewn herself from fabric Yates had bought in Amarillo. Mrs. Wilson had contributed a lace veil that had been her own mother's, and Rosa had fashioned a bouquet of early wildflowers tied with blue ribbon. The twins, dressed in their finest clothes, were held by Rosa during the ceremony, though Matthew nearly disrupted the proceedings with his attempts to crawl toward Yates mid-vow. "He's eager to make it official," Pastor Wilson joked, causing laughter to ripple through the congregation. When Yates kissed his bride, sealing their vows, cheers erupted from the assembled friends and neighbors. Even the normally stoic ranch hands whistled and stamped their boots in approval. The celebration continued at the ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard under budding oak trees. Rosa and several church ladies had prepared a feast, and a fiddler from town played lively tunes as children danced and adults visited. As evening approached, Yates found Nora sitting on the porch, watching as Bull Anderson showed Matthew how to clap his hands in time to the music. "Happy, Mrs. Calloway?" Yates asked, settling beside her and taking her hand. "Very," she assured him, leaning her head against his shoulder, "though it still doesn't seem quite real." "Which part?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "That we're married or that we found each other at all?" "Both," Nora admitted. "If that blizzard hadn't happened, if you hadn't found us, it's miraculous, really." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "I've thought about that too. I was a fool to be out in that weather, looking for cattle that were probably already dead. By all rights, I should have frozen to death myself that night." "But you didn't," Nora said softly. "You found us instead, or we found each other," Yates suggested, kissing her temple. "Either way, I'm grateful." As darkness fell, the guests gradually departed, with final congratulations and knowing winks. Rosa had volunteered to take charge of the twins for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first evening as husband and wife. "They will be fine," she assured Nora for the third time, shooing the anxious mother toward the stairs. "Go, be with your husband." In the master bedroom, now their bedroom, Yates had lit several lamps, casting a warm glow over the space. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the dresser, and the bed had been turned down invitingly. Nora stood nervously in the doorway, suddenly shy despite the weeks of growing closeness between them. "I know this isn't your first wedding night," Yates said gently, coming to stand before her. "But I want you to know that I'll never compare you to Emily, and I hope you won't compare me to Thomas. What we have is new and ours alone." Tears of gratitude filled Nora's eyes at his understanding. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Yates cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with love and desire. "No more thanks between us," he said softly. "We're family now." As his lips met hers, Nora let the last of her reservations melt away. This was right, this new beginning, this second chance at happiness for both of them. Together, they would build a future filled with love, not just for themselves, but for Matthew and Elizabeth too. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Nora's head resting on Yates's chest, he stroked her hair tenderly. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confessed. "A wife, children, a home that feels complete." "Nor did I," Nora replied, her fingers tracing the contours of his face in the moonlight. "After Thomas died, I thought my heart had died with him." "And now?" Yates asked, catching her hand and kissing her palm. Nora smiled, happiness welling up within her. "Now I know that love doesn't end with loss. It just waits like a seed under snow, ready to bloom again when the time is right." Yates pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Then I'm glad I found you in that snowstorm, Nora Kemp." "So am I," she whispered. "So very glad." As spring gave way to the heat of summer, the Calloway ranch thrived. Under Nora's guidance, the house became a true home, filled with warmth and laughter. The twins grew steadily, celebrating their first birthday in June with a small party attended by the ranch hands and neighbors. Matthew took his first steps at 11 months, charging fearlessly across the kitchen floor into Yates's waiting arms. Elizabeth, more cautious, waited until she was 13 months before walking, but compensated by speaking her first clear words earlier than her brother. "Papa," she said one morning, reaching up to Yates as he entered the kitchen for breakfast. The word stopped him in his tracks, his eyes filling with tears of joy. "That's right, sweetheart," he confirmed, scooping her up and kissing her chubby cheek. "I'm your papa." Nora, watching from the stove where she was frying eggs, felt her heart overflow with happiness. The adoption papers had been finalized a month earlier, making Matthew and Elizabeth legally Calloways. But this simple word from her daughter's lips seemed to seal the new family bond even more completely. In September, as the first hints of autumn touched the Texas landscape, Nora discovered she was expecting a child, Yates's child. The news brought both joy and a touch of anxiety. "The twins will only be a year and a half when the baby comes," she worried aloud as they sat on the porch swing one evening. "They're still so little themselves." "We'll manage," Yates assured her, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Rosa will help, and the older children always adjust. My brother and I were just 15 months apart and my mother survived." Nora leaned against him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I just want to be a good mother to all of them." "You're already the best mother I've ever known," Yates told her, his voice husky with emotion. "This baby is lucky to have you as our Matthew and Elizabeth. As am I." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Unlike her difficult time carrying twins, Nora bloomed with this baby, her skin glowing and her energy abundant. Yates watched over her carefully nonetheless, insisting she rest each afternoon and hiring a young girl from town to help with the heavier housework. The twins, now toddling everywhere and chattering constantly, seemed to understand something important was happening. Matthew would pat Nora's growing belly curiously, while Elizabeth would bring her rag doll and place it gently on her mother's lap, saying "baby" with solemn certainty. In late April of 1889, just as the bluebonnets carpeted the Texas hillsides, Nora gave birth to a healthy son whom they named Joseph Thomas Calloway Joseph for Yates's father, and Thomas in honor of the twins' birth father. "He's perfect," Yates whispered, cradling his newborn son while Matthew and Elizabeth peered curiously at their baby brother from Rosa's protective arms. "He looks like you," Nora observed tiredly from the bed, happiness outweighing her exhaustion. "Those blue eyes." "Poor kid," Yates joked, but his face shone with pride as he carefully transferred the baby to Nora's waiting arms. "Baby," Elizabeth confirmed seriously while Matthew simply looked confused by all the fuss. Rosa chuckled, bouncing the toddlers gently. "Come, niños, Mama needs rest. You can see your brother again later." As Rosa led the twins from the room, Yates sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Nora's shoulders as they both gazed down at their son. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he admitted quietly. "3 beautiful children and you, all in the space of 2 years. Sometimes I think about that night in the blizzard," Nora said, tracing Joseph's tiny features with a gentle finger. "How close we came to freezing to death if you hadn't found us." "But I did," Yates reminded her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And now look at us." Nora smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "A family." "A family," Yates agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Forever." 5 years later, the Calloway Ranch had expanded considerably. Yates's careful management and hard work had increased both the cattle herd and the cultivated acreage. The original house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, which now included Joseph and 2-year-old twin girls, Sarah and Sophia, a development that had both shocked and delighted Nora and Yates. "Twins again," Yates had exclaimed when the doctor confirmed it. "What are the odds?" "Higher than you might think, with twins already in the family," Dr. Jenkins had explained, grinning at Yates's stunned expression. Now, on a warm June evening in 1894, the entire Calloway clan gathered on the wide front porch to celebrate Matthew and Elizabeth's 7th birthday. The twins, no longer babies but confident, bright children, proudly showed off their gifts. A carved wooden horse for Matthew and a porcelain doll for Elizabeth, both purchased on Yates's last trip to Fort Worth. Joseph, now 5, watched enviously as Matthew galloped his horse along the porch railing, while the toddler twins babbled happily in Rosa's lap, too young to understand the significance of the day. "They're growing so fast," Nora remarked to Yates as they sat side by side on the porch swing. "I can hardly believe it's been 7 years since they were born." "And nearly 7 years since I found you in that snowstorm," Yates replied, taking her hand in his. "Best thing I ever did, getting lost in that blizzard." Nora smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found us that day?" Yates shook his head firmly. "No, some things are meant to be, Nora. I believe with all my heart that we were meant to find each other, you, me, and those 2 little babies in the snow." As the summer twilight deepened into dusk, Nora looked out at her family, Matthew and Elizabeth, racing across the yard with Joseph trying to keep up. The baby twins now dozing in Rosa's arms, and Yates beside her, still holding her hand after all these years. From a desperate moment in a deadly snowstorm had come all this joy, all this love, all this life. Through hardship had come blessing, through loss, renewal. "You're right," she told Yates softly. "Some things are meant to be," he smiled, raising her hand to his lips. "I thank God every day that you were meant to be mine." As stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd once been a desperate widow, stranded in a snowstorm with infant twins, certain they would perish. Now she was Nora Kemp, beloved wife and mother of 5, surrounded by happiness and security. "Time for cake," Rosa called from the doorway, and the children came running, their faces alight with anticipation. Later, after the children were tucked into bed and the house had grown quiet, Nora and Yates stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "Happy?" he asked, the question he'd asked her countless times over their years together. Nora turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, now bearing the lines of years and weather, but still as handsome to her as the day he'd carried her and the twins through the snowstorm. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "And you?" Yates's smile was all the answer she needed, but he gave her words as well, the same words he'd spoken on their wedding night, now proven true by the passage of time and the depth of their enduring love. "I'm glad I found you in that snowstorm, Nora Kemp. So very, very glad."